Hello and welcome to this graphical comparison of Shadow Man Remastered. In this video I'm going to compare the graphics of the NightDive remaster on PC to the original PC version. I mentioned in my review of the game that you can actually turn the HD textures off in the remaster if you want to play with the original textures. But if you do this, we still have the new shadows and other improvements, so for a more accurate comparison I'm going to be comparing this to the original game. For anyone that's curious as to what all three versions look like, here's an example in the Asylum. So this is the original Shadow Man, this is the Shadow Man remaster with the HD textures turned off, and this is the Shadow Man remaster with the HD textures turned on. Unfortunately, when you turn the textures off in the menu, you have to actually warp out of the level and then warp back in for it to actually affect the textures in the level or the area that you're in at that time. The textures will instantly change in your actual menu if you look at some of your items, for example, and I'll fade in and out here of what the new item textures look like in the remaster. I should say that this comparison is of the original Shadow Man menus and the remaster menus. You'll notice that not only the textures are improved, but also we have an additional cadeau counter now for each of the areas. In general, all of the menus have been improved, and I really like on the title screen now how it shows you little videos of each of the levels in the background. These videos change every time you turn Shadow Man on, so it just gives you something a little bit more interesting to look at while you're in the menu. The health and voodoo meter in the HUD has been greatly improved. The more I look at it, I can't really tell if it's been AI upscaled or it's been redrawn from scratch. If it has been drawn from scratch, it's pretty incredible how accurate it's been recreated. But either way, it's a lot cleaner looking and has far more definition. One final comparison I'll show before I move on to the full game is a comparison between the alpha footage and the full game. You'll see that quite a lot has changed since this game was initially shown at the alpha stage, and some people have formed opinions over what the game looks like based on that alpha footage. I think also just in general people complain about graphics of Nintendo 64 games that have been remastered, often claiming that the Nintendo 64 versions were actually quite good for graphics and that not much has changed for these remasters. I can't help but feel like these people are looking at the Nintendo 64 with rose tinted glasses. I'm a huge fan of the Nintendo 64, but I feel like people are comparing it to how they remembered what things looked like 22 years ago. So of course it's hard to compare something you see now to your childhood memories. Some things just don't age well. For example, remember Macaulay Culkin? This is him now. Feeling old yet? Alright, joking aside, the only way to really truly compare visuals is by putting them side by side or fading in and out of them. So let's do that now. For my comparison, I'm going to select a couple of different areas and levels from Shadow Man to give a little bit of variety. So where better to start than the start of the game, the bayous of Louisiana. So for me it was pretty clear to see the textures have all been improved in this area, but what really stood out to me was this first light we come across in this little cave. I really like this new grid effect that the lights give now. In some ways this is like NightDive showing off, or at least showing off what the new lighting engine can do. I actually thought that NightDive added that light in, but it turns out that light was in the original game. It just doesn't give off nearly the same effect that the new version does. And I think that's probably why it stood out to me so much when I first played the remaster. Next up we are outside Nettie's house. The two main changes here for me is the textures on the ground and on the fence. They look noticeably improved. One thing that's quite strange to me is that the sky moves in different directions. I can't really explain why this is. It almost looks like it's been reversed or something. Inside the house, again, just slightly better textures on the ground, probably most noticeable the wooden planks on the ground. I found in general the wooden textures in the Shadow Man remaster just look a lot nicer. I think this is a resolution thing where they were able to just use higher resolution wooden textures. And like with most things, the lighting is a little bit nicer inside Nettie's house now. In the original Louisiana, things are a lot gloomier, and I think there's a nice brightness and warmth to the remaster now. The next level I'm going to look at is the Asylum. Now, the first thing, this isn't really a major update or anything, but it was something that stood out to me because it was the first time I really noticed the dynamic lighting showing off with objects that were moving. Again, I thought this light may have been put here just because NightDive were showing off and showing how the shadows change as these pistons move back and forward. But this light was in the original, it just didn't have the dynamic shadows that the new version now had. Making our way inside the Asylum, I'll call this area the basement, where we have lots of platforming elements where we're jumping onto these little platforms that move about. Easily the biggest difference in the remaster here is the shadows that are being projected onto the wall. Again, this is just NightDive using the new lighting engine to the best of their ability, intentionally placing lights behind the cage so that it projects this really nice shadow on the wall, and we can actually see the outline of your character as well, which looks really nice too, I thought. Something actually symbolic about this, almost as if it's like showing you behind bars, like you're in a prison or something. Maybe I'm reading into it a little bit, but it's certainly a cool effect and makes a big improvement on the original in this area. It was around this time when I was initially playing the remaster that I felt this was like a unique experience and it was going to be different from the original game. Next up, this isn't really a graphical difference, but I should point out that in one of the Asylum rooms there is a Govie that's actually missing in the remaster. I'll cut to the original where you can see that the Govie is there. In the remaster it's been replaced by a barrel with a cadeau inside. This is because later on in some of the cut content, some of the Dark Souls have actually been moved to it. And another change to the Asylum is the cable cart has now been modified. No longer just having one lever, the cable cart now has two options, one taking you to the Cathedral of Pain and the other taking you to the cut content. Alright, the final level to look at in my comparison is the Temple of Fire. This one to me is really where the texture differences stood out so much to me. I noticed the doors, these like the wood effect on the doors. I was like, when I first looked at this in the remaster, I knew that these had been updated and greatly improved. But it wasn't until I actually compared the footage of the two that I noticed just how much of an upgrade these have actually got. And it's only really when you look very closely to this stuff that you actually notice the differences. So if you're standing far away, it's harder to see just how much detail has been added in. Even the wood grain on the blood waterfall I thought was really nice too, and also a great improvement on the original. And the texture that's used on the floor almost looks like some kind of painting, like watercolor or like oil painting or something. There's just something very artistic about it and it almost looks like it's hand painted or something. In my review I actually talked about the shadow itself. If we notice, the shadow that's cast on your character model looks really low poly, especially around the bullet. You can just see like a couple of, this looks like a hexagon really. And if we compare this to the shadow of the remaster, we see that it's much more realistic and that actually tracks your character, so we can see that it's real-time shadow, or at least it's based on the lighting, like depending on where you're standing in comparison to where the lights are. And finally, coming full circle almost, this is the room in the Temple of Fire that was shown in the alpha footage. I think this room perfectly captures the two biggest improvements with the remaster: new lighting and new textures. After seeing this final comparison, if there are some people that think there still isn't a big difference between the original and the remaster, then I don't know what they're talking about. In fact, I don't think they know what they're talking about. Thanks for watching my comparison video. If this gets popular and people would like to see more, I'll maybe do some of the other levels. But if you want to check out some other videos in Shadow Man, I also have a full review of the game and I'm doing a full playthrough also. So please check out those videos if you want to see more.